Love at 50, a story of second chances, a novel by VMS. Chapter 1, A Life in Stillness. The bougainvillea outside Mira's window bloomed in restless bursts of magenta as though the plant had more courage to be alive than she did. Every morning she sat in the cane chair by the window, her cup of chai cooling beside her, her eyes following the street that bustled with other people's lives. Children pedaled their bicycles with a sequence of freedom. Neighbors exchanged gossip loud enough to carry across walls. A vegetable seller sang out the day's prices. Life in all its colors trembled outside. Inside her house was a museum of quiet. The clocks ticked too loudly. The furniture sat too neatly, and her days unrolled like the same film played again and again. She had turned 50 last winter, a number she once thought belonged to other people, women with silver hair tied its buns, women who spoke endlessly about medicines and relatives, yet here she was half a century behind her, living like the shadow of someone she used to know. It wasn't that she was unhappy, at least that is what she told herself, widowed for a decade. She had grown used to her own company. She filled her mornings with gardening, her afternoons with books, her evenings with staring at the setting sun as though it might answer her questions. She smiled politely when neighbors waved. She even laughed now and then when her son called from abroad or a daughter babbled on video chat. But laughter never lingered. In the silence that followed, sometimes pressed her hand against her chest, wondering if her chest was still capable of beating for something beyond survival. Love, she told herself, was for the young, for hearts unscared, for people who hadn't buried half their lives in memories. At her age, it was enough to live quietly, enough to keep breathing. At least that is what she believed until the day she saw the man with a sketchbook. Chapter 2, A Neighbor. That summer evening carried a softness in the air, the kind of breeze that lifted the fragrance of jasmine and scattered it gently across the lane. Mira had just finished watering her garden when she noticed the man for the first time. He wasn't from the neighborhood of that. She was certain she knew every face here, who quarreled with whom, who never missed morning temple bells, who left milk packets unattended on their doors. But this man was new. Salt and pepper hair fell across his forehead, a sketchbook rested under his arm, and his steps had an unhurried rhythm as though time bent itself kindly around him. He passed by the old park bench opposite her gate and one weathered by years of monsoons and sat down with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Mira pretended to muss with her hooves. Sorry, Mira pretended to fuss with her hose, her eyes drawn to the swift movement of his pencil. He was sketching the bougainvillea veins spilling across her wall, the tangled riot of pink blossoms and magentas, and that had once been her husband's pride. His hand moved with confidence, shaping something invisible into lines and curves. Curiosity tugged at her, but before she could look longer, the hose sputtered and sprayed an unexpected arc of water right across the path. Oh, she gasped, rushing forward to turn the knob. The water splashed dangerously close to his shoes, but instead of frowning, the man laughed. Not a polite laugh, not one wrapped in the stiffness of strangers, but a warm, open laugh that seemed to shake the stillness around them. No harm done, he said, his voice calm, deep, threaded with humor. He shifted the sketchbook slightly to keep it dry. In fact, it adds character to the picture. Maybe I will draw a puddle. Mira froze, startled by the easy kindness in his tone. For a moment, she could only manage a quiet apology, fumbling with the hose as though it could shield her from further embarrassment. But when she glanced back, he was smiling, not at a mistake, but at her. A smile without judgment, one that reached his eyes and lingered there like an old friend rediscovered. Something stirred within her, a ripple had not felt in years. Later that evening, as she sat by her window again, she caught sight of him walking away, a sketchbook tucked under his arm. She should have forgotten him as quickly as he disappeared into the dusk, but she didn't. Instead, she found herself wondering who was he, why here, why now, the most dangerously of all, why had his laughter followed her into the silence of her home? Chapter 3, The Sketchbook Stranger. The next morning, Mira woke earlier than usual. She told herself it was the bird song that had stirred her awake, but deep inside she knew the truth. Some part of her was hoping against reason that she might see him again. She made her tea, watered her plants, and sat by the window with a book she didn't intend to read. Her eyes kept straying to the street, to the park bench where he had sat the evening before. Hours passed. Children marched off to school. The vegetable seller made his rounds, and still the bench remained empty. Mira told herself she was being foolish. He was probably just passing through, a traveler, a guest, someone whose life would never touch hers again. But fate had other plans. That evening, as the sun melted into amber light, she heard footsteps. She leaned forward unconsciously, heart quickening, and there he was, the man with the sketchbook. This time he noticed her before she could look away. He passed, lifted his hand in a smile and a small polite wave, and then, to her surprise, crossed the street. "Good evening," he said, his smile gentle as though they were already acquaintances. Mira nodded awkwardly. "Good evening." He glanced at the bougainvillea, then at her. "Your garden," he said, "is a painter's dream. For me, for sketching it yesterday without asking, I couldn't resist." Her lips curved into a hesitant smile. "It's not mine, really. It was my husband's pride. I just keep it alive." There was a pause, a flicker in his eyes that seemed to understand more than her words revealed. "Then you are doing well," he said softly. "It's not easy keeping something alive." The way he said, the quiet gravity in his tone, made her wonder about the shadows he carried. She gestured to the sketchbook under his arm. "May I see?" He opened it with the reverence of someone handling a sacred object. Page after page bloomed with delicate pencil strokes, trees, rooftops, children at play, and there in the center her bougainvillea in wild, beautiful detail. Mira gasped. "It looks alive." He chuckled. "That's the point, isn't it? To catch life before it slips away." There was something magnetic in his presence, something calm yet deeply human, like a man who had walked through storms and still carried the rain in his eyes. "By the by, I'm Rajiv," he said finally, extending his hand. She hesitated. 50 years of careful manners making her uncertain if such gestures still belonged in her world. But then she placed her hand in his lightly and said, "Amira." Her name on his lips sounded different, as though it carried a new weight, a new possibility. That night, long after he had left, she sat by a window once more, but the silence inside her home felt altered. The stillness wasn't as heavy as before. It was laced with the memory of a smile, a voice, a sketchbook, and for the first time in years, Mira felt the faint stirrings of anticipation for tomorrow. Chapter 4, shared walks. The days that followed carried a quiet rhythm of change. At first, it was coincidence. Rajiv would be sketching on the bench just as Meera stepped out to water her plants, a nod, a smile, a brief exchange about the weather. But soon the coincidences began to feel deliberate. One evening, she found him waiting outside the park gate with two paper cups of chai. The vendor insisted I buy two, he said, eyes glinting with mischief. It wouldn't have been rude to refuse, Mira laughed, though she knew very well that no vendor had insisted on anything. She accepted the cup with warmth seeping into her palms, and together they walked slowly beneath the gulmohar trees, their fairy blossoms carpeting the ground like a trail meant just for them. Their conversations began simply about gardens, about books, about the quiet frustrations of aging bodies. But as days unfolded, so did their words. I used to design homes, Rajiv told her once, sketching on the back of a receipt. Buildings with open courtyards, windows that let in too much light, spaces that breathed. But when my wife fell sick, the house itself felt like a cage, every wall pressed in. His voice faltered, and Mira didn't rush to fill the silence. She only walked beside him, letting the sound of their footsteps bridge the spaces his words left behind. In return, she told him of her husband, how he had courted her with poetry scribbled on the backs of newspapers, how he had laughed too loudly at his own jokes, how his absence had left felt like a wound that refused to close. Rajiv listened, not as a courtesy, but with a stillness that told her he valued every syllable. Sometimes they spoke of lighter things, movies they had loved in their youth, the absurdity of technology, stubborn ache in their knees after long walks. Other times they let silence speak for them. It wasn't awkward silence, but a compassionable kind, like two melodies that understood how to pass together. Mira noticed changes in herself. She no longer sat at the window simply to watch others' life. She found herself dressing with more care, tying her hair a little differently, like flowing hair with salt and pepper streaks, even humming while she worked in the kitchen. Small, almost invisible changes, but inside she felt something stir. One evening, as they sat on the park bench, Rajiv turned a fresh page in his sketchbook. May I? He asked, pencil poised. May you what draw you? Mira's heart skipped. No one had ever asked her that before, not even in her youth. She hesitated, flustered. At this age, what will you capture? Wrinkles, grey hair, tired eyes? She was giggling. Rajiv shook his head gently. No, I will capture presence, and presence doesn't age. For a long moment, she held his gaze, and then, with a quiet breath, she nodded. As the pencil moved across the page, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in years. She was no longer invisible. Someone saw her not as a widow, not as a mother, not as a figure fading into the background of life, but as Mira, simply Mira, and that she thought was a miracle in itself. Chapter 5, Echoes of the Past. For all the warmth that their evenings brought, Mira sometimes found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, as if word as if everything as if it looked stylishly. Guilt clung to her like a second skin. In that stillness, her late husband's face would raise before her. The curve of his smile, the way his voice would fill the house with poetry and laughter. A sharp ache spread in her chest as the thought, was she betraying him by smiling with another man? The next day, as she sat in the garden, pruning away dried leaves, and the weight of that guilt pressed hard, so when Rajiv appeared at the gate, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, she greeted him with a restrained smile instead of her usual warmth. He noticed You are quieter today, he said softly, walking into the garden when she gestured him in. Did I do something wrong? Mira shook her head, avoiding his eyes. No, not you, just me. They sat beneath the bougainvillea, the air heavy with the scent of blossoms. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Rajiv set his sketchbook aside. I loved my wife, he said, his voice steady, deeply. She was the anchor of my wandering spirit. When she died, I thought the world ended with her. For years, I couldn't even look at my drawings. I felt like cheating to find joy when she could no longer share it. Mira's throat tightened. Yes, she whispered. That's exactly it. Sometimes when I laugh with you, I feel as though I'm betraying him, as though am erasing him. Rajiv shook his head gently. We don't erase them, Mira. We carry them. They live in the folds of our memory, in the way we still water their plants or whisper their names in prayer. But carrying them doesn't mean we stop walking. She blinked back tears. And what if the world doesn't understand? What if my children don't? Rajiv's gaze held hers, steady and kind. Then let the world misunderstand. The truth doesn't need witnesses, it only needs courage. His words lingered long after he left that evening, echoing in her chest. She realized then that love, especially at this age, was not about replacing what was lost. It was about honoring it while daring to choose life again. Still, she closed her eyes that night. The conflict remained. Love pulled her forward, guilt pulled her back. She did not yet know which way she would break. Chapter 6. The Garden and the Joy. The bougainvillea had bloomed brighter than ever that week, its pink blossoms spilling across the walls like laughter too larger to be contained. Mira stood in the garden with a tray in her hands, 2 cups of steaming chai, a plate of cookies she hadn't baked herself but had arranged carefully on porcelain. Her heart thundered in a way it hadn't for decades. When the gate creaked open and Rajiv entered, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, as always, Meera felt a nervousness that reminded her of her youth. It was ridiculous, she told to herself. She was 50 and not a girl awaiting a suitor, yet the flutter in her chest refused to be silenced. I thought today, she began, forcing calm into her voice. Instead of the park, you might sit here in the garden. Rajiv's face softened, as though she had given him something far greater than an invitation. I would be honored, he said simply, taking the chair she had placed beneath the shade of the bougainvillea. She poured the chai, her hands steady, though her heart was not. They spoke at first of ordinary things, the stubbornness of weather, the price of vegetables, and about the politics, the strange sounds of the neighborhood dog made at night. But slowly the conversation deepened. I stopped drawing for almost a year after my wife passed, Rajiv admitted, tracing a finger along the rim of his cup. Even every line felt hollow without her watching out over my shoulder. Then one day I picked up a pencil again, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to remind myself that my hands still knew how to create, that I hadn't lost everything. Mira listened. The quiet of a garden holding their words like sacred offerings. I know that feeling, she said. After my husband was gone, I stopped writing poetry. I felt meaningless, but sometimes in the silence of the night, lines of verse would still come to me, uninvited, insistent. Perhaps grief never kills the artist in us, it just makes it harder to hear the music. Rajiv's eyes lit with recognition and he leaned forward. Then perhaps it's time you wrote again. Meera looked down, flustered. At my age, what would I write of? Youth, dreams, long faded? No, Rajiv said gently. You would write of what you know best: endurance, loss, the courage to keep watering a garden even when half of your heart is gone. Something inside her shifted at his words. For years, her grief had been in her cage. Yet here was someone who saw not just the bars but the strength it had taken to survive inside them. They sat together until the sun dipped low, painting the garden in gold. Rajiv sketched the bougainvillea once again. but this time he added a figure beneath it, her, Mira. With her sari tucked neatly, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her gaze lifted not to the past but to the horizon with longing, with love, and desperate for a new companion. When he showed her the drawing, she felt her throat tighten. He hadn't captured her wrinkles, her tiredness, her age, but he had captured her presence. And for the first time in many years, Mira felt not like a shadow, but like a story still unfolding. Chapter 7, Whispers of the World. It began with glances. A fruit vendor at the corner who raised his brows when he saw Rajiv walk beside Meera, the temple women who whispered behind their palms when she lingered too long at the park gate. Even the milkman, who had never spoken more than two words to her in years, suddenly had options wrapped in half smiles. Meera tried to ignore it. After all, what harm was there in companionship? Two people walking, sharing tea, exchanging laughter, but in a neighborhood where even the color of curtains became talk. Her new-found joy could not remain invisible for long. One afternoon, as she stepped out to buy vegetables, she overheard two women murmuring at the stall. 50 and behaving like a girl, one said with a snicker. Her children live abroad, don't they? No wonder she is restless, the other replied. The words pierced sharper than any thorn her garden had ever grown. She kept her face steady, bought her vegetables, and walked away, but the laughter followed her all the way home. It wasn't just the neighbors, her own children noticed. Her daughter Anjali called one evening, her tone sharper than usual. Ma, the neighbors have started talking. They say you are always with that man. Who is he? Meera hesitated. His name is Rajiv. He is a friend of mine. A friend? Anjali's voice tightened. At your age, you are 50. People will laugh. Do you want our family to be embarrassed? The words stung more than the gossip of strangers. Anjali, Meera whispered, her fingers trembling around the phone. Is it wrong to talk to someone, to walk in the park, to share a cup of tea? You don't understand. Her daughter pressed. It looks improper. You are not young anymore, Amma. Think of your dignity. Think of us. That night, Mira cried silently into her pillow. She hadn't felt like a rebellious teenager in decades, but suddenly she was being scolded for something as simple as choosing not to be alone. When Rajiv came that next morning, she tried to smile, but he noticed the shadows under her eyes. They have started talking, haven't they? He asked gently. She didn't answer, but her silence told him everything. Arjun looked out at the street, his jaw tightening. Let them, he said at last. The world will always whisper, Mira. It whispered when we marry too young, when we choose our careers, and when we raised our children differently. The world thrives on whispers, but you, he turned toward his gaze steady. You deserve laughter, not silence. Her eyes felt torn between fear and longing. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of judgment pressed harder than ever. And though she still walked with him, still listened to his stories, a tremor of doubt had begun to creep into her steps. Chapter 8, the breaking point. The house felt colder than evening, though the ceiling fan spun lazy. At always, Meera sat at the dining table, her hands folded in her lap, as Anjali placed her phone on the table with a sharp tap. I spoke to Auntie next door today. Her daughter began, her voice clipped. She said she sees you with him almost every day, morning, evening. Ma, what are you thinking? Meera's son-in-law, seated across the table, cleared his throat as if to soften what was coming. Amma, we are not saying don't have friends, but the way it looks, people will talk. They already are. Meera tried to explain, her voice trembling. Rajiv is not what you think. He is kind. He listens. Ma, Anjali cut in, eyes flashing. You are 50 years old, a widow. Do you know how embarrassing this is for us, our friends, our relatives? They ask questions. What am I supposed to say? The words hit like blows. Widow, embarrassing, shame. Words she thought she had armored herself against, but hearing them from her own daughter broke something inside. I'm not doing anything wrong, Mira whispered, her throat thick. I sit with him, we walk, we drink tea. Is that such a crime? Anjali's voice softened for a moment, but the disapproval lingered. Ma, we only want what is best for you. People won't understand. Please stop seeing him. Dinner passed in silence. After that, the clanging of cutlery felt louder than words. That night in her room, Mira pressed her hands to her face and wept. She thought of Rajiv's love, of the way he had sketched her beneath the bougainvillea, of the peace she felt beside. Then she thought of her children, of the faces that carried pieces of her heart, and of the burden that claimed her happiness would bring them. She felt torn into two. The next evening, when Rajiv came to the gate, she did not open it. She stood hidden behind the curtain, watching him wait for a few minutes before walking away. The sight of his retreating figure burned into her chest. For the first time since their friendship had begun, Mira felt the sharp edge of loneliness written. The house seemed darker, the silence heavier, as though life itself had withdrawn in punishment. She lay awake until dawn, one truth hammering inside her. Perhaps love at her age was not meant to bloom. Perhaps the society, children, and judgment would always crush it before it could fully flower. She wasn't sure she had the strength to fight. Chapter 9. The Rainy Confession. The monsoon arrived with a fury that year. Sheets of rain lashed against windows, and the narrow lanes of the colony turned into rushing streams. Mira stood at a window watching the downpour blur the world into silver streaks. It had been 4 days since she last opened the gate for Rajiv. 4 days since her daughter's harsh words echoed in her mind. 4 days of silence so heavy that even her plans seemed to droop. And then through the rain she saw him. Rajiv, drenched to the skin, stood at her gate. Water dripped from his hair. His shirt clung to his frame, but his eyes searched for hers with unshaken fire. Her heart leapt, but fear clenched it back. She didn't move. She told herself to stay hidden, to let him turn away like he had before, but he didn't. He raised his voice above the storm. Mira, Mira. The name tore through the curtain of rain straight into her chest. She froze, every nerve alive. Are you really going to let whispers decide for you? He shouted, his words raw, almost trembling. Am I Am I so shameful that you would rather hide than walk with me? Tell me to leave if that is what you want, but don't let silence killing me what we have found. Tears blurred her vision. She wanted to step back to shut the window, but her legs carried her forward. Unbidden, she opened the door. The rain roared louder. As she stepped out, the water soaking her sari instantly. Rajiv's eyes widened when he saw her, her hair plastered to her face, her hands trembling. You wouldn't have come, she whispered, though her voice betrayed her longing. He took a step closer, his chest heaving. I couldn't stay away, Mira. I have spent years alone convincing myself that companionship was for the young. And then you came with your quiet, your laughter, your tea, your courage. You have given me back something I thought I had buried forever. Her tears mingled with the rain. Rajiv, I don't care what they say, he continued, his voice breaking. I don't care about neighbors, about relatives, about rules that only know how to chain hearts. All I care about is this. He reached out, his hand hovering, waiting us, whatever this is, whatever we call it. The thunder rolled by his words, but his words were louder in her heart. For a moment, the world fell away, the gossip, the disapproval, the shame. There was only the warmth of his hand, the storm around them, and the fragile, beautiful truth she could no longer deny. Her fingers slipped into his. And just like that, the loneliness that had haunted her for years shattered.